At Rio's Cathedral Metropolitana, the ocean breeze carried a child's words through 300 stunned guests. "That's my daddy too." 4 words from a barefoot 7-year-old in a faded sundress froze Brazil's wedding of the year. Emily Santos clutched a tattered photograph, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. The elite of Rio watched in silence as their beloved billionaire's son, Marcus Almeida, crumbled at the altar. His bride's bouquet of white orchids hit the marble floor. But what the gasping crowd didn't know was that Emily had walked 3 miles from the favelas carrying her dying mother's last letter. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. The cathedral trembled, not from earthquake, not from storm, from 4 words. He is my father. Time stopped in Rio de Janeiro's most sacred cathedral, 300 guests frozen like marble statues. The ocean breeze carried whispers of a truth about to shatter everything. Emily Santos stood barefoot, 7 years old, dust-covered legs, faded sundress hanging loose on her thin frame. A tattered photograph clutched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Tears carved paths through the dirt. On her cheeks, Marcus Almeida, Brazil's most eligible bachelor, heir to a billion-dollar empire, about to marry Isabella Rodrigues, daughter of the most powerful political family in São Paulo, stopped breathing. The white orchid bouquet slipped from Isabella's trembling fingers. Silence roared louder than any. Scream Emily's eyes, dark, intense, carrying a weight no 7-year-old should ever know, locked onto Marcus. Not pleading, not afraid, knowing. Behind her, barely visible in the cathedral's grand entrance, a woman watched, pale, dying, her last breath spent pushing her daughter toward a truth that would change everything. The letter sewn into Emily's dress pocket felt heavy. A mother's final message, a key to a secret that had been buried for 7 years. Marcus's perfectly pressed white wedding suit suddenly felt like a costume, a lie. Isabella's diamond engagement ring caught the cathedral's light, $1 million symbol of a future that was about to disintegrate. The priest's fingers gripped his sacred text, frozen mid-sentence. 1 moment, 4 words, an entire world about to collapse. The story of Marcus Almeida began long before that moment in the cathedral. Raised in the gilded cage of Brazil's elite, he was a prince without a kingdom, born to wealth that stretched back 3 generations. His father, Eduardo Almeida, had built an empire from nothing. Sugar plantations, real estate, political connections that wove through São Paulo like invisible threads of power. But empires have secrets. Maria Santos lived in a world that existed in the shadows of Marcus's brilliance. The favelas of Rio, a labyrinth of survival, of dreams crushed and reborn with each sunrise. She worked 3 jobs: cleaning, cooking, washing clothes for the rich families who rarely saw her as more than a shadow. 7 years ago, everything changed. A charity gala. Marcus, young and reckless. Maria, working as a temporary server. 1 night, 1 moment of connection that would echo through generations. She never asked for anything. Not money, not recognition, just a single moment of humanity. Isabella Rodrigues came from a different world. Political royalty. Her father, Senator Carlos Rodrigues, had been grooming her for a life of perfect appearances. Law degree from São Paulo's most prestigious university. Fluent in 3 languages. A face that graced magazine covers. Their engagement was more than a love story. It was a merger of families, of political ambitions, of carefully constructed dreams. Marcus knew the rules. Preserve the family name. Maintain the image. Success was not just expected, it was demanded. His mother, Eleanor Almeida, watched everything with eyes that had seen too much. A woman who understood the price of secrets, who had spent a lifetime protecting her son from the shadows of his own history. The Almeida family mansion stood like a fortress on the hills overlooking Rio. Marble floors, paintings of ancestors who seemed to watch with judgment. Every room told a story of carefully maintained perfection. Maria Santos kept her pregnancy a secret. No medical records, no support, just survival. Emily grew up knowing she was different, raised by a mother who filled her with stories, not of bitterness, but of hope, of a father who didn't know she existed, a father who represented a world so far from their reality it seemed like a dream. Her mother's illness was a slow burn, cancer eating away at hope. But she had one mission, one purpose, to ensure Emily would find her truth. The letter sewn into Emily's dress was more than paper. It was a map, a key, a final act of a mother's love. On the morning of the wedding, Maria Santos made her final decision. Weak, dying, but unbroken. She would give her daughter a chance at a life she could never have. 4 words would be her legacy. He is my father. The moments after Emily's declaration were a symphony of chaos. Isabella Rodriguez, perfectly poised bride, political princess, shattered like fragile glass. Her diamond engagement ring clattered against the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo through centuries of carefully constructed illusions. Marcus Almeida's world collapsed inward. His mother, Eleanor, stood frozen in the 3rd row. Her perfectly tailored Chanel suit suddenly felt like a costume. Years of secrets, years of protection, unraveling in 4 simple words. Senator Carlos Rodriguez, Isabella's father, moved first. A lifetime of political maneuvering kicking in before emotion could take hold. "Security!" he hissed to a nearby attendant. "Remove that child." But nobody moved. The cathedral, a witness to countless marriages, to generations of Brazil's elite, held its breath. Emily Santos stood unchanged, a 7-year-old prophet of truth. The tattered photograph clutched in her hand told a story more powerful than any wedding vows. Maria Santos, her mother, watched from the cathedral's entrance. Pale, dying, but unbroken. Her entire life had been a journey to this moment. The ocean breeze through the cathedral's open windows carried the scent of jasmine and hidden truths. Whispers began, first low, then growing, a tsunami of speculation. Isabella's perfectly applied makeup ran with tears, not of anger, not of betrayal, but of a sudden, crushing understanding. She knew, somewhere deep inside, she had always known something wasn't right. Marcus took a step forward, then another, each movement mechanical, like a man walking toward an execution. The photograph in Emily's hand told everything. A younger Marcus, younger Maria, a moment captured before everything changed, before wealth and status had drawn their battle lines. "DNA test?" Senator Rodriguez commanded. His voice cut through the cathedral like a knife. Immediately, but Marcus wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Emily, on the little girl who carried pieces of him he had never known existed. Elena Almeida's hand gripped the ornate cathedral chair. Decades of carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The truth was a weapon, and it had just been unleashed. Emily's mother, Maria, took a single step forward, weak, dying, but determined. "Tell her," she whispered. So soft, so powerful. The letter sewn into Emily's dress felt heavy. A final message, a key to a story that had been buried for 7 years. Marcus approached Emily, not as a stranger, not as a potential father, but as someone finally seeing a part of himself he never knew existed. The cathedral, witness to countless marriages, to generations of Brazil's most powerful families, watched in stunned silence. One little girl, 4 words, an entire world about to be rewritten. The moments after Emily's declaration were a symphony of chaos. Isabella Rodriguez, perfectly poised bride, political princess, shattered like fragile glass. Her diamond engagement ring clattered against the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo through centuries of carefully constructed illusions. Marcus Almeida's world collapsed inward. His mother, Eleanor, stood frozen in the 3rd row. Her perfectly tailored Chanel suit suddenly felt like a costume. Years of secrets, years of protection, unraveling in 4 simple words. Senator Carlos Rodriguez, Isabella's father, moved first. A lifetime of political maneuvering kicking in before emotion could take hold. "Security!" he hissed to a nearby attendant. "Remove that child." But nobody moved. The cathedral, a witness to countless marriages, to generations of Brazil's elite, held its breath. Emily Santos stood unchanged, a 7-year-old prophet of truth. The tattered photograph clutched in her hand told a story more powerful than any wedding vows. Maria Santos, her mother, watched from the cathedral's entrance. Pale, dying, but unbroken. Her entire life had been a journey to this moment. The ocean breeze through the cathedral's open windows carried the scent of jasmine and hidden truths. Whispers began, first low, then growing, a tsunami of speculation. Isabella's perfectly applied makeup ran with tears, not of anger, not of betrayal, but of a sudden, crushing understanding. She knew, somewhere deep inside, she had always known something wasn't right. Marcus took a step forward, then another, each movement mechanical, like a man walking toward an execution. The photograph in Emily's hand told everything. A younger Marcus, younger Maria, a moment captured before everything changed, before wealth and status had drawn their battle lines. DNA test? Senator Rodriguez commanded. His voice cut through the cathedral like a knife. Immediately, but Marcus wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Emily, on the little girl who carried pieces of him he had never known existed. Elena Almeida's hand gripped the ornate cathedral chair. Decades of carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The truth was a weapon, and it had just been unleashed. Emily's mother, Maria, took a single step forward, weak, dying, but determined. "Tell her," she whispered. So soft, so powerful. The letter sewn into Emily's dress felt heavy. A final message, a key to a story that had been buried for 7 years. Marcus approached Emily, not as a stranger, not as a potential father, but as someone finally seeing a part of himself he never knew existed. The cathedral, witness to countless marriages, to generations of Brazil's most powerful families, watched in stunned silence. One little girl, 4 words, an entire world about to be rewritten. The aftermath of truth was never clean. Within hours, Rio de Janeiro became a crucible of scandal. News stations, social media, street corners, everyone spoke of nothing else. Marcus Almeida's world transformed from a carefully curated empire to a landscape of exposed secrets. The DNA test was inevitable, rushed, conducted under the glare of media cameras and political maneuvering. But even before the results, everyone knew. Emily Santos was more than just a claim. She was living proof. Maria Santos, dying in a small hospital room, became the eye of a hurricane. Journalists, lawyers, private investigators, all circling, desperate for the full story. Her medical records told a brutal truth, stage 4. Cancer, months, weeks to live. A final act of desperation driving her to expose a truth that had been buried for 7 years. Elena Almeida's world crumbled from the inside out. She knew the full story, had always known. The weight of secrets is a burden that crushes slowly, silently. 20 years ago, a single night had changed everything. Marcus's father, Eduardo Almeida, had been a different man then. Before the empire, before the political connections. A young businessman with dreams bigger than his current reality. Maria had been more than just a server at that charity gala. She was brilliant. Studying economics at night, working multiple jobs during the day, a woman whose potential was suffocated by the very system that Marcus's family represented. One night, one moment of connection, a connection that went beyond a simple encounter. The Uai Rodriguez family, political royalty, began their counterattack immediately. Senator Carlos Rodriguez called an emergency family meeting, not in their luxurious São Paulo mansion, but in a secure location, heavily guarded, away from prying eyes. Isabella sat silent, her perfectly constructed world shattered. She knew something else, something nobody else understood. The wedding wasn't just a marriage, it was a merger, a political alliance that would have reshaped Brazilian politics for the next decade. Emily's appearance destroyed everything. The favelas of Rio watched with a different kind of attention, a community that understood survival, that knew the language of secrets and survival. Thomas Rodriguez, Isabella's uncle, a powerful federal judge, began pulling strings, investigating Maria Santos, her background, her motivations. But Maria had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The letter sewn into Emily's dress was more than just a message. It was a carefully constructed weapon. Bank records, documented, encounters, evidence that had been collected over years, meticulously preserved, waiting for this moment. Marcus oscillated between shock and a strange sense of recognition. Emily was undeniably his daughter. In her eyes, her mannerisms, the way she held herself, a genetic inheritance that couldn't be denied. The hospital where Maria Santos lay dying became a fortress. Journalists, investigators, everyone wanted the full story. But Maria had one final card to play, a secret that would reshape everything. The DNA test came back, conclusive, irrefutable. Marcus Almeida was Emily's father. But paternity was the smallest part of the story. The real truth was yet to be revealed, and it would change everything. The truth was a labyrinth, and they were about to get lost in its depths. 7 days after the Cathedral incident, a sealed file arrived at the Almeida family's legal offices. No return address, delivered by a courier who vanished before anyone could ask questions. Inside, a story that would rewrite everything they thought they knew. Maria Santos wasn't just a woman from the favelas. She was a brilliant economist who had been systematically erased from academic records. Her thesis, a groundbreaking analysis of economic inequality in Brazil, had been stolen, published under another name, a man with powerful connections, Eduardo Almeida. Marcus's father, the man who had built an empire on stolen intellectual property. The documents told a story of academic theft, of a brilliant young woman whose work had been appropriated, whose career had been deliberately destroyed, not just by one man, but by an entire system designed to protect the powerful. Elena Almeida discovered the first piece of the puzzle in her husband's private study. Hidden behind a false panel, a collection of research papers, Maria's original work, annotated, studied, clearly used as the foundation for Eduardo's most significant business expansions. Isabella Rodriguez, removed from the wedding preparations, began her own investigation. Her political family had always operated in the shadows. She knew how to dig. What she found was more complex than anyone could have imagined. The night Marcus and Maria had their encounter wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Eduardo Almeida had known about Maria's research, had deliberately positioned his son to meet her, to potentially neutralize a threat to his business empire. Emily wasn't just a child, she was evidence, a living, breathing document of a crime that stretched back decades. The favela network began to move. Old contacts, long-buried connections, people who had watched the Almeida family's rise with silent fury. Thomas Rodriguez, the federal judge, found himself in an impossible position. The case threatened to expose networks of corruption that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. Maria Santos, dying in the hospital, became more than a patient. She was a witness, a weapon. Her medical records told another story. The cancer wasn't just a coincidence, traces of slow-acting toxins, deliberately administered, a systematic attempt to silence her before she could tell her story. Marcus stood at the center of a storm he was only beginning to understand. His father's empire wasn't built on business acumen, it was built on theft, on destruction, on the systematic elimination of those who threatened his power. Elena Almeida made a decision that would change everything. She would tell the full truth about Eduardo's crimes, about the network of corruption, about everything they had hidden for generations. The sealed file contained more than documents. It contained a revolution. Emily Santos, the 7-year-old who had interrupted a wedding, was about to become the key to bringing down one of Brazil's most powerful families. The game was changing, and nobody, not the Almeidas, not the Rodriguez, not the powerful networks that had protected them, was prepared for what was coming. Truth was a weapon, and it was about to be unleashed. The final confrontation would not happen in a courtroom. It would happen in the heart of the Almeida family's empire. A press conference became a battlefield, not of words, but of truth. Marcus Almeida stood at the podium. not in his perfectly tailored suit, but in simple clothes that connected him to his true heritage, to Maria, to Emily. Elena Almeida sat in the front row. Her husband, Eduardo, once the most powerful businessman in São Paulo, handcuffed between two federal agents. The sealed documents, Maria's stolen research, the evidence of systematic academic theft, the deliberate destruction of a brilliant woman's career. It all came flooding out. Emily sat beside Maria's hospital bed, watching the broadcast, her small hand holding her mother's fragile fingers. The network of corruption began to unravel. Senator Carlos Rodriguez, Isabella's father, tried to manipulate the narrative, but the truth was a force more powerful than any political machine. Isabella herself became the unexpected weapon. Instead of protecting her family's interests, she chose truth. Her testimony exposed a web of political connections that stretched from São Paulo to Brasilia. Bribes, suppressed research, systematic elimination of voices that threatened the established power structures. Maria's original economic thesis, the document Eduardo had stolen and used as the foundation of his empire, became Exhibit A in the most significant economic crime investigation in Brazilian history. The favelas of Rio watched. Communities that had been silenced for generations suddenly found their voice. Thomas Rodrigues, the federal judge who had initially tried to suppress the story, found himself on the other side of justice, his own connections exposed, his network of protection dismantled. Emily became more than a child. She became a symbol of resilience, of truth, of a system that could be challenged. Marcus discovered something profound in those moments. His identity wasn't defined by his family's wealth, but by the choices he would make now. He established a foundation in Maria's name, dedicated to supporting young researchers from marginalized communities, funding academic research, creating scholarships. The stolen thesis, the document that had been the source of Eduardo's wealth, was republished, with Maria's name, her full, unedited work. Isabella, who had once been positioned as a political princess, became an unexpected ally. Her own legal background became a weapon against the very system that had raised her. The hospital room where Maria lay became a center of power, dying, but unbroken. Her final act was not vengeance, it was restoration. Emily would have opportunities her mother could only dream of. The Almeida Empire crumbled, but something new emerged from its ruins, a new understanding of power, of justice, of family. Marcus looked at Emily, really looked at her for the first time. Not as an interruption, but as a beginning. The cathedral where everything had started seemed to watch, a silent witness to a transformation that would reshape Brazilian society. 4 words had started everything. He is my father. Now those words would mean something entirely different. A promise, a hope, a future. 1 month after the cathedral, the world had changed. Maria Santos's final days became a testament to resilience. Her hospital room transformed into a sanctuary of hope. Researchers, journalists, activists, all drawn to the woman who had brought down an empire with nothing but truth and determination. Emily sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, not with sadness, but with a profound understanding that transcended her 7 years. Marcus visited every day, not out of obligation, but out of a connection he was only beginning to understand. The Maria Santos Foundation became more than a charitable organization. It became a movement. Scholarships for students from the favelas, research grants for marginalized academics, a systematic approach to dismantling the very systems that had tried to silence voices like Maria's. Isabella Rodrigues made her own transformation. No longer the political princess prepared for a carefully orchestrated marriage. She became a champion of academic integrity. Her law background became a weapon against systemic corruption. Her family, the powerful Rodriguez political dynasty, crumbled under the weight of investigations triggered by Maria's revelations. Elena, Almeida's decision to expose her husband's crimes, became her path to redemption. She testified, fully, completely. Holding nothing back, Eduardo Almeida awaited trial in a maximum security prison. The empire he had built, constructed on stolen intellectual property and systematic oppression, reduced to legal documents and criminal charges. The favelas of Rio celebrated in a way only they could, not with violence, but with hope. Maria's original economic thesis, now published in full, became required reading in universities across Brazil. Her work, once stolen, now celebrated as a groundbreaking analysis of economic inequality. Emily became the unexpected symbol of a new generation. Child who had interrupted a wedding, who had spoken 4 words that changed everything. Marcus learned fatherhood was not about wealth or status, but about presence, about understanding, about healing. He and Emily began to build a relationship, slowly, carefully. Respecting the complexity of their history, the cathedral where everything had started became a landmark, a symbol of a moment when truth became more powerful than any carefully constructed lie. Maria's final days were filled with something she had rarely known in her life: peace, hope, knowing that her daughter would have opportunities she could only have dreamed of, knowing that her truth had become a weapon more powerful than any system of oppression. The medical team watching Maria's final moments understood they were witnessing more than just a death. They were witnessing the end of one story and the beginning of another. Emily would carry her mother's legacy, not as a burden, but as a promise. The networks of power that had tried to silence Maria discovered something profound. Truth cannot be buried, it can only be delayed. As the sun set over Rio de Janeiro, casting long shadows across the city that had been the backdrop to this extraordinary story, a new chapter was already being written. 4 words had started everything: "He is my father." Now, those words meant something entirely different: a promise of justice, a hope for change, a future waiting to be born. 10 years later, the landscape of Brazil had changed, subtly, profoundly. The Maria Santos Foundation had become more than a charitable organization. It was a movement, a living testament to the power of a single voice, a single moment of truth. Emily Santos, now 17, stood at the podium of the São Paulo Economic Forum, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a scholar in her own right. Her mother's original thesis, once stolen, now celebrated, had become the cornerstone of a new approach to understanding economic inequality. Universities across Brazil now studied Maria's work not as a historical document, but as a living, breathing blueprint for social change. Marcus Almeida watched from the audience, no longer the billionaire's son, now a committed advocate for academic integrity and social justice. The empire he had inherited had been systematically dismantled, its resources redirected into educational initiatives, research grants, support for marginalized communities. Isabella Rodriguez, now a prominent human rights lawyer, sat beside him. Their relationship had evolved beyond the interrupted wedding day. They had become partners, not in marriage, but in a shared mission of exposing systemic injustices. The favelas of Rio had transformed. The Maria Santos Foundation had created educational programs, research centers, economic development initiatives that gave voice to communities long silenced. Elena Almeida had dedicated her life to exposing the networks of corruption that had defined her previous existence. Her testimony had triggered investigations that reached the highest levels of Brazilian political and economic structures. Eduardo Almeida, once a powerful businessman, remained in prison. A living reminder that no empire is built without a cost. The cathedral where everything had begun became a monument, not of tragedy, but of transformation. Emily's journey had become more than a personal story. It was a national narrative of resilience. She had completed her mother's work, expanded it, transformed it. Her research now explored the systemic ways that academic and economic oppression continue to impact marginalized communities, not with bitterness, but with a profound understanding that change was possible. Marcus had learned fatherhood was a journey, not a destination. Each day a new discovery of connection, of understanding. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on truth, on acknowledgement of past wounds, on a commitment to healing. The network of support that had emerged from that single moment in the cathedral had become a powerful force for change. Veteran journalists who had covered the original story continued to track the long-term implications, how 4 words had triggered a transformation that reshaped Brazilian society. He is my father. Those words had become something more than a personal revelation. They were a call to truth, a challenge to systems of power, a promise of possibility. The Maria Santos Scholarship Program now supported hundreds of students from marginalized communities, each scholarship a testament to a woman who had been silenced but refused to be forgotten. At the heart of it all was Emily, not defined by her past, but creating her future. Her mother's letter, the one sewn into her dress that day in the cathedral, remained her most treasured possession, a reminder of a journey that had started with a dying woman's final act of love. Rio de Janeiro watched, a city that had always understood the power of resilience, of hope. The ocean breeze carried whispers of a story that was still unfolding, a reminder that truth has its own momentum, that justice, though slow, is relentless, that a single voice, no matter how small, can change everything. 4 words had started everything. Now they were a legacy, a promise, a future waiting to be born.